Was Charlie going to join us? Did you mention Charlie earlier?
Charlie was supposed to phone in at some point. So for folks on the
Rick's
phone,
still on the phone.
okay. So for folks on the phone, you should have gotten a copy of the PowerPoint or whatever format it came through. The slideshow that Jason's about to roll through.
Am I up?
So you are on as soon as we wake up the computer.
Okay.
So the idea here is Jason's going to walk us through a brief presentation, show and tell, focus specifically on demonstration and research projects. That will then hopefully inform our subsequent conversation regarding, from the regulatory perspective, does it look like a general authorization or a general permit would be a good fit for expedited? Yep.
All right, so we're going to make this quick. I think everybody in this group is pretty well informed about the marine energy sector. So I thought of this more as a sort of thought starter, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. I think you've given us how long total for this?
I think we've got, for your part, if we can keep it to 10-ish minutes, a little time for Q&A. Yep. Yep.
So 20 minutes total, and I say, again, if you got a question I think you should just go ahead and ask it. We'll go there. So why are we having this conversation to begin with? We're in the midst of an energy revolution around the world. I'm sure you've all seen headlines. I know I read it every single day. It's sort of amazing when you start looking for how much is happening, not just in the United States, but even places like China, Europe. Europe already has about 6 gigawatts of offshore wind installed. So there's a lot happening offshores around the world. The resource is plentiful. There's a tremendous amount of energy there. The question is, can we extract it appropriately and cost effectively? Obviously, it's inexhaustible. If it isn't, we'll probably be having different conversations at that point about how we continue to survive as people, as a species. Close to populations, we know that most folks live around the coast, both here in the United States as well as around the world. So if you have an asset, an energy asset that's close by, it behooves us to at least consider it and see if it's something that we can economically extract. Accessing new space, you've probably all seen the amount of effort that's gone into trying to open public lands to things like wind and solar. There are important things going on there. And it's been really tough to open up any new space, and you have transmission lines that have to be brought to load centers. If you're coming from a place like Wyoming or Montana, you're going to cross multiple states, and that's a really difficult thing to do. The ocean is right there. It's a lot closer to load centers. Could access some space for us. And then there are features people often ask, if we've got wind and we've got solar and they're both doing pretty well and the cost is approaching parity with natural gas facilities, why are we talking about new forms of renewables, whether it's wave energy, tidal, or geothermal, or biofuels? And the simple answer is that each one of these energy sources has different features to it. They have their pros, they have their cons. In the case of wave energy, you have a very consistent energy source. It's very easily to predict. And when you begin combining a number of these devices, you start flattening the power curve, which looks really good on the grid side. And it makes it a lot easier and cheaper for grid operators to start integrating that wave energy into the grid, as opposed to some of the resources like wind and solar, which have relatively low predictability. We're getting better at it all the time, but it's still very low. The clouds come when they want to come. The wind blows when it wants to blow. Waves, when they start, they keep going. They never go away completely. And if you put two wave measurements, two wave rider buoys out of the water, a wave passes over the first one, you measure it. When that wave hits that second buoy, unless it's run into a vessel that's out there, the energy in that wave is going to be essentially identical, and you can predict with a very high level, approaching 100%, what that power is going to be at that project. And that's really valuable to the energy sector, because they're really looking increasingly. It used to be, an hour out. Then they start looking at 30 and 15 and even just a couple of minutes out to make decisions about how much power they're going to put into the grid in order to meet the load requirements. If you can know with 99.5% predictability what the energy is going to be, that's really valuable to the energy sector.
Jason, could you quickly explain flat power curve? Are you talking about in the course of a 24-hour day?
Yeah, if you took one wave buoy and you measured the output, it would look like this, right? Up, down, down it goes. Up it goes, down it goes, flat, back and forth. So each time it does that, it's inducing current. And so the voltage goes up and then it drops back down. Voltage goes up and it drops back down. If you take two of those devices and they're out in two different wave environments, or in the same wave environment, but they're offset from each other, then you've got now two of these curves looking like that. If you put 10 of them out there, they start looking flatter and flatter and flatter until you get a waveform. The output from the project looks relatively flat as opposed to any single one device. Wind turbines do pretty well as well, except that you have essentially the same output from a project, but it can be very different from the project that's right next door because of the difference in the wind. Waves, not the same. If you had three projects that were 10 or 20 miles apart, they'd really flatten out. Y'all know that when we talk about marine hydro, we're talking about wave. We're talking about tidal, although the modern parlance is often to lump that in with current energy. So a current could be a California current, or it could be a tidal current. But we're still using the terms tidal as differentiated from a current, ocean current technology. Then we have ocean thermal exchange, which plays on the differential of warm surface water, cold, deep water, but that only happens in tropical environments. Not something that's happening around here, but it certainly is happening in places like Hawaii. They're working on that. And then we have offshore wind, but really we're focused on wave energy in this area. We've got some great pictures here. It looks to me like Deus is shining down on this perfect little device sitting in this perfect environment. Looks like it's probably not making a lick of energy right now, but it certainly is pretty. We'll have to ask Justin here. It's his technology.
Do you want a good picture, or do you want it?
I saw some videos that it was splashing around. There was helicopters and there was spray, and it was really doing its thing. But this is so this is the Azura technology. You should all recognize it. Same basic machines in the water at PMEC NET's North Energy Test Site in 2012. Justin's, I'm speaking for Johnny, he's here, but they've been in the water for a year in Hawaii at the Wave Energy Test Site, which is owned by the Navy. It's off of Kaneohe Bay, Marine Corps Base, Hawaii, in Oahu, Oregon. Hawaii. That site, very briefly, now has three cables: a 30, a 60, and an 80-meter site. Justin, you at the 30-meter?
Yeah.
There's another device I'll show you in a minute, but there's a series of deployments planned for this site. Again, I would characterize it as a great place to deploy your device, a full-scale device, to get familiar with operation and deployment of your device. They do have storms that come through there, and you can see how your device works in more extreme condition. But in general, it's a little mellower than the Oregon coast. So from the industry's perspective, Hawaii is a great place to go deploy a full-scale device and kind of get comfortable with how it operates before you put it out in a place like the Oregon coast. Here's another company that's going in the water at Hawaii. It's Ocean Energy Limited. Their U.S. version is called Ocean Energy U.S. It's a oscillating water column. This device, what you can't see under the water, I wish I had a pointer. It goes down here, it shoots way out here, and there's an opening here where the wave comes in and fills that cavern up there and pushes the air out that turbine. And up it goes, it compresses the air and pushes it out. Water goes down, it reduces the pressure, sucks air back in that bidirectional turbine. It's always spinning in the same direction, but it's based upon the rise and flow of that water. You can do that on shore, like a levee, and there is one technology like that in Europe called WaveGen, which is the first commercial project in the world. It's in Utricu, Spain. But it basically looks like a concrete jetty that they put out in front, perpendicular to the to the flow of the waves to show us to shelter the port and collect the majority of the energy. This device is the lifesaver. It's called the Fred Olsen Renewables Company out of, I'm not sure which Scandinavian country they're in, but Fred Olsen is a large marine operations company, and they spun off a renewables group here several years ago. Their device is called the Lifesaver, I guess because it's a big yellow ring. It's in the water in Hawaii right now. They are not connected to the grid, I don't think. They're testing some functionality of the device.
I'm sorry, did you say how they power?
I don't know about that one at all. They're not connected to the grid. I don't know what their power output is.
So Jason, how big is, you know, how, I mean, if you put a person on that, with that railing on the inside sort of?
Yeah, that's human scale, so that's not a huge device. Maybe, what, 6-8 meters across there?
Total? Yeah.
250 kilowatt machine? Yeah. Here it is out of the water. I think this was, I'm not sure if that was, that actually was whenever it was, oh, no, that's Seatricity. I'm sorry, Seatricity Limited, the Oceanus 2, which was deployed at Wave Hub, which is on the west side of the UK. So comparable in size, I would say. I thought that, so I wanted to show you I'll just use this. I wanted to show you the Columbia Power Technologies. Their device up here, they actually sent this to me as just a generic diagram of a mooring system. But I'll start with the device at the top. So Columbia Power, which is an Oregon-based company, is also on the list of companies that will be deploying in Hawaii. They're currently building their full-scale device. They're actually testing the generator, which Siemens is building for them. This machine is big. It's about 1 megawatt. There are 2 generators on board. Each generator is about 6 meters in diameter. One of them is now at NREL in Colorado, where it's hooked up to a 5 megawatt dynamometer, which is basically a big machine that spins wind turbines to test them. They've now modified it so they can spin it back and forth, so it's replicating what's happening in the ocean. There's 2 wings on that device. You see one of them in the front and one of them in the back. Each one is connected to one of the 2 generators. They plan on being in the water in the full 80 meter site, I think in 2018 for a 1-year deployment.
Jason?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what 80 meter side did that would be PMAX?
Yeah, WETS in Hawaii.
Oh, in Hawaii, okay.
So I think I've got a slide here that sort of lays out the plans there for WETS, but there's a series of deployments. I think there are 4 or 5 total over the next 2 years. One thing about the WETS side is you have to be associated with the Navy. The Navy's got to sort of bless you to go into their site. It's the Marine Corps base Hawaii. So if I had a technology, I couldn't just go to Hawaii and deploy it. I'd have to get money from the Navy. There must be something about my technology the Navy finds interesting or strategic to their needs. So it's not an open test site. Not like
Is there any indication that that's inhibited otherwise qualified developers from testing there that the Navy stuff?
Certainly on the basis, yes, the answer is yes. Certainly on the basis of the fact that it can only accommodate certain types of technology. So they have certain anchors in the water at certain depths. You can only be a surface floating device. So it can only accommodate basically wave buoys of some form to sit on the surface. So looking at the mooring system here, this is a good example of a single point mooring system. After they deployed in Puget Sound, they realized that their 3-point system didn't buy them anything, that all the pressure was always on one leg of the mooring system. And so they optimally would like to have a single point mooring system for 2 reasons. One is less cost than the 3-point system. And 2, as is the case for many technologies, and Matt Justin will have to weigh in here if you agree, the mooring system is integral to the functionality of the device. You're not just keeping it in place. It's adding or subtracting, if it's not designed correctly, to the output of the device. Is that how your system works?
It depends, yeah. I think more often than not, the mooring system does have a link to performance because you're trying to orientate the device, you're trying to keep it in a certain place. Maybe there's certain tensions that you need. So I think more often than not, it does have an influence, but it depends on the technology.
So there's two aspects. There's one, keeping it on station. Secondly, is how it affects the functionality of the device.
So you would think of 3-point motors, would keep it on station. This looks like it would want to rotate around the radius on 1 point more and put tension on the umbilical.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, for this company, as far as I know, the only company that I know of is talking about a single point mooring system. So I brought this up in part because Kirk and Chris asked me to make sure we talk a little bit about anchoring and mooring because it's an important part of the overarching conversation. And again, I think somebody in this group pointed out that when we talk about the space, footprint of the project, it's not just the device on the surface. It's what's happening underneath the water as well. So I just drafted this as sort of some starting points for the conversation. In some cases, like in Hawaii, they have put in permanent anchors, and you have to accommodate their layout, whether or not it's appropriate for your device or not. So that's just how they decided to do it. I don't know what NIMREC will do. I think NIMREC PMEX sets will likely deploy their own anchors as well. But I think that's a decision to be determined. Justin, anything to add to that?
Hey, it's a big to be determined. I think the obviously you're going to have corner marker buoys and that sort of stuff that's going to be part of the infrastructure of the facility. Whether or not there's more quasi-permanent structures to hold devices, that's a long-term decision.
So I already touched on some of these issues here. There's really not a single best option from the vantage point of the technology company. So each one's going to have a different approach in how they think about the anchoring and mooring system and how it relates to their device. They can be anywhere from 1 to, as most I've seen, is 4. And in terms of the anchors, this is just a list of the standard types of anchors that are out there. Plump weights, dead weight, just a big chunk of something that's heavy. Drag embedment anchors, which is basically what you think of on the anchors you have on your boat. Pilings are something that you drive into the ground one way or the other. And then plates, something that kind of works its way down to the sand as a horizontal surface with all the weight of the sand on top of it. We've done a pretty great, Rick Williams, in fact, and another company, I forget now the name of that company, but they did this anchoring study for us, and it's on our website. You can read all about the different types of anchors and what their pros and cons are. Some are appropriate for sandy bottoms, some are appropriate for mud, etc. So a lot of decisions to be made about anchors, but those are being made more or less on a company by company basis.
Jason, can I add a thought?
Of course.
So the other type of anchor is an embedment anchor, or what's known as a vertical reaction anchor. And what those allow you to do is go and bring the mooring scope more vertical. And the drag anchors or clump anchors, there's actually no vertical load on those anchors. They're horizontal loads. That's why you've got the wide scope of the mooring legs. If you get to embedment or vertical reaction anchors, you can go to semi-taut, taut, or even tension leg moors. And the holy grail is a single point moor for the least disruption out on the shared grounds.
Could I, Rick, I appreciate your work on that, and I know that that was something that was brought up to you by crab fishermen in Clatsop County, but just so you understand the thought process, a single point moor with a separate power cable is, from a fisherman's perspective, just as bad as a 2-point moor. What we look for, and what was mentioned by the crabbers in Astoria, was a single point moor where the power cable was associated with that mooring cable, so that the cable single point would allow the buoy to move with the current, and crab pots could be deployed relatively close by. With a separate power cable shooting off at to a different point, it's really no better than a 2-point moor from a fishing perspective.
So at the risk of setting a precedent, I agree with Scott.
So very quickly, sort of summary of deployments that have occurred or are occurring. So ORPC, Ocean Renewable Power Company, is a tidal company from Maine. They've done a number of deployments, probably the nationally leading ocean energy company, but they're focused on marine-based deployments as well as riverine technologies. They've been doing a lot of work in Alaska. NWEI, Northwest Energy Innovations, and Justin Plur here and his partner Steve Kopp have the Azura technology. They're currently in the water in Hawaii, have been for over a year. Notice that at the bottom of that, they're listed again. That's because if everything goes well, they'll be back for deployment of the next generation of their technology, a full-scale technology to be deployed in 2018. Meanwhile, Fred Olson is in the water.
Also in Hawaii? Is that
All in Hawaii, yeah. Fred Olson, Ocean Energy Limited is the oscillating water column technology that I described earlier. They're on tap for deploying in 2017. Columbia Power Technologies will be deploying their full-scale device with 2 Siemens generators on board in 2018, followed by NWEI back in the water in 2018. So, sort of final comments here. The marine energy sector is pretty active. There's a lot happening here in the United States, and there's a lot more happening in the UK. In Australia, it's very active right now. There's a number of companies that are going in the water. Some are putting power on the grid. I don't think any of those technologies are specific to Australia or their own nations. I think those kind of companies can go anywhere in the world. But what you're starting to see is critical mass in terms of the knowledge about the industry, coming together of the various universities and European and U.S.-based groups that are thinking about this, trying to move it forward, whether we're talking about the environmental work being done by PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Labs, whether we're talking about the standards and certification efforts going on, what's called TC114, which is a group of international participants trying to set the standards for things like connectors and mooring systems and electrical connections, and standardizing these things so that insurance companies are more comfortable with signing off on a project because they know that all these features have been standardized. It's the same thing. We're TC114, but there was a TC1. I think hydropower was TC17 or something like that. So this process has gone on many, many times, and we're in the middle of our process with TC114. And it will go on for many years as we try to standardize the various elements. We are starting to see a significant uptick in deployments. So many so that I had to ask Matt to keep a spreadsheet on who's going in the water, when and where. Just 2 or 3 years ago, if one company went in the water, it was a pretty big deal, and we were all aware of it. Now there's several in the water right now, and I couldn't tell you who else in the water at this point. We are still waiting, I think, for what we refer to as strategic partners to get on board. And by strategic partners, we mean partnerships with the big OEMs, the Siemens, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, those kind of companies that have deep pockets, both in terms of their knowledge, their money, their engineering expertise. So far, most of the projects have been on a arm's length basis. Like Columbia Power is working with Siemens, but Siemens didn't donate anything; they bought their services. And I would hope that as those two companies, for example, work together over the next 3, 4, 5 years, that they'll develop a trust and a rapport and an understanding of their mutual capabilities, and one day they partner. And that's where you get that significant uptick in investment coming from the strategic partners. Again, Europe is still the center of the action. I don't know, at our conference in September, we might even have a conversation on how the Brexit will affect all of this. There's no question that it will have some impact. I'm not sure what. And then finally, be aware that the U.S. Department of Energy has, as of this year, split the water program from the wind program. So now the water power program is a standalone program with the DOE. That's a good thing. It has its own budget, has its own director, has its own specialists. It signifies a maturation of the industry, and it corresponds with the growing budget at the federal level for our industry. Yeah, I think that's, you all know about PMEX sets. Just to make sure you've probably all seen this image several times. Just very quickly, right off Newport, 6 nautical miles due west. Four cables going out in the water, so you can accommodate 4 different technologies. Each one of the berths, there'll be 4 berths, each one of the berths can accommodate an array of technology, array of devices, probably up to 3. So each one of the companies will be able to see how their respective equipment is performing. On shore, where you'll have electrical and controls center before it goes onto the grid. They are, Justin's in the middle of this, he can elaborate a lot more, but they're 2 or 3 years into the permitting process. We expect the Department of Energy they announced that they would be releasing the RFP, the request for proposals, for funding for the Grid Connect test site this summer. We know that there are right now 2 viable sites, one here in Oregon and one in California, that are potential applicants for that funding. Hopefully we'll see that announcement pretty soon, and maybe within 6 months we'll have some finality to this, and one of the 2 projects will move forward. Justin, anything to add on that PMEX sets?
No, I think you covered the highlights.
He's up to his, you know what, in that. So there you go. Happy to answer questions.
Just to add to the, Walter still on the phone has been very involved with OSU's project, and I think a big takeaway of that is when you have genuine collaboration with the communities, a lot of things are possible. And OSU has done a very good job of being embedded with legitimate local groups to find places. And the story's been told a million times, but the night of the Find Committee that a site was chosen, it took, with the right people in the room, it took a half an hour rolling out the maps and banking on the knowledge that we had. I'm just delighted in retrospect that night when those people who understood that stuff were finding that site, that they had in mind where other people from other communities fished, and it was a sufficiently small enough place and size that that we're all fortunate that it fell into place.
Well, I agree. The genuine collaboration is absolutely key to success. I meant to say that the West deployments, from my perspective, is it's part of a longer-term conversation. You've had some one-off deployments or attempted one-off deployments. You've had a lot of tank testing, and companies like Columbia Power learned from the failures of some of the preceding companies that if you rush too quickly to commercialization, you're probably not ever going to get to commercialization. So they have taken a longer-term view. NWI doing exactly the same thing, utilizing modern technologies, especially modeling software that is starting to emerge that allows you to see how your device is going to really function without actually deploying it. Up to a point, that's great, but we know that there's no substitute for getting in the water. So you've had these deployments, you had a lot of tank testing, you've increased DOE funding, you've increased Navy funding. You've had this wonderful opportunity of the wave energy test site in Hawaii emerging, providing a pathway for the deployment of these technologies that weren't quite ready for a fully energetic site, but could really benefit from getting the thing in the water and watching it operate for a year or so. That's wonderful. It's a great next step for the industry. But all those companies that are in the water at West, or will be over the next 2 or 3 years, are now wondering what they're going to do after that. And that's where a PMXS or a Callawave comes in, because they cannot afford to put their own cable in the water for a demonstration project. It just doesn't work. There's too much associated with the cost, the permitting, and just the gear itself. That's where a test center comes in. We don't have one of those places in the United States. That's why there's so much focus on getting one right now. If we don't get one, we know that what the companies will do. They will go to Europe. They'll go to EMEC, which is an established center up in Scotland. They'll go to Wave Hub. There's one in Portugal. There's one in Australia. Not one in the United States. That's what we're trying very hard to make happen. that it will take federal investment. If things work out very well, by 2019, we'll be talking about fully permitted site either in CalWave or at PMEX sets, and hopefully anticipating the arrival of one or more companies that will want to deploy a multi-year project, perhaps an array of 3 devices, where we can really begin to fine-tune our understanding of the ecological impacts, the functionality of the equipment, its cost, and its output, and see what and start creating familiarity at the energy sector level with the utilities. The off-takers ultimately have to want to buy the power, and we have to demonstrate to them that it meets their needs, and that's where a long-term demonstration project comes in.
Is the Navy site reconnected?
Yes, it is. But it's being used on site there. I don't think it's being sold.
No, the Marine Corps base takes the power. It's minuscule at the moment, but they're just taking a net meter.
Well, I remember from years ago that Belinda was saying it's counterintuitive, but the importance of the grid connection is that you're providing power to the devices. It's not so much receiving power because it's kind of trivial. It's really a research project, but that the being able to deliver power from land to power instruments and stuff at sea.
Right, going the other way.
Going the other way out, which is completely counterintuitive. You think it's going to build? They're going to make the energy.
Well, it isolates the power takeoff and other things, so you can really understand what's going on. You're not trying to power, light bulbs and data things, other things on the device.
As we move forward, do we see any future for nets at all? As opposed to sets?
I think the answer is yes, but you can't predict what it's going to be. The fact that it exists is still interesting to folks. There are some companies that are interested. The time is not right now. Could be having a different conversation a year from now as they approach maturity, and they'll be looking for an open water deployment. Again, nets is only appropriate for probably summertime deployment only. We limit it to 100 kilowatts if you want to actually produce electricity, send it to the Ocean Sentinel to take that power and disseminates it. Has the telemetry gear to send the information back to shore, and it dissipates the power. Or you can just float out there by itself without being dependent. It may not have any value.
The California project on a similar timeline trajectory as the United States, the Cal Wave one.
It's one. Yeah, it's a competitive site. I mean, the California site. Rick is on the line. Rick, feel free to jump in here. I'm not sure if you heard the question, but what is the timeline of the CalWave site relative to PMEX sets?
It's similar. PMEX a couple year or two ahead of us as far as permitting.
CalWave has there's an oil rig in the water with a decommissioned cable going to it off Vandenberg Air Force Base, and Rick and some folks down at the San Luis Cal Polytechnic Institute at San Luis Obispo have been working on that project, and I would suggest that even if it doesn't receive funding, it's an interesting project. You've got gear in the water. I'd like to figure out how to parlay that oil rig sitting out there not doing anything, and the cable.
So we have the UK Wave Hub folks over this week for our conceptual design review.
Whatever happened to M3?
M3 is
doing very well. They're in the WEC prize competition. They did their deployment and recovery off of Camp Rylea. That gave them the credibility to go into the WEC prize process, and they were a semi-finalist at Last Word. Jason, do you have any more word on them?
So WEC Prize, y'all know about the WEC Prize, Wave Energy Converter Prize, DOE, you've probably heard of the SpaceX Prize. DOE figured they would do something with wave energy to see if they could kickstart next generation of technologies that would maybe come up with something that was revolutionary compared to what we currently have. And so they started with 92 companies, 92 technologies. They're now down to, I think, the top 9 or 10. Each one of those technologies, there's 2 from Oregon, M3, and a company from Portland called Octoharmonics. Those companies are now putting final touches on their scale device, which they are taking then to a place called Carter Rock, which is a naval facility in Maryland, I believe. It's a major indoor wave tank testing facility where the military normally runs kind of tests they run. but they've made it available to the WEC prize participants. It's kind of a big deal. It's way more expensive than what you would experience at Oregon State University outside of our budget generally. So it's a wonderful opportunity for these companies to work with the National Renewable Energy Lab, the Department of Energy, universities, and then ultimately deploying it Carter Rock. The winner will be decided upon, I think, by September, October, perhaps. But if they don't meet a benchmark that, and I don't remember what it is exactly, but it requires that their output be X amount higher than some standard that we currently consider to be what we can do already. If you can beat that by a factor of 2, then you get a WEC prize of, I think, $1.25 million. If they don't ever, no company, whoever, regardless, some company will emerge as the best, but if they still haven't met that metric, they don't get the big bang for the money. But M3 is still in the running. Top 9.
Folks from Massachusetts, Resolute Power,
Bill Stabby, Resolute, that's right. I'm glad you read. I totally forgot about it. Resolute Marine Power is a pretty well-established Boston-based company. They've had a couple of deployments. They have been thinking about deploying at Camp Riley for some time. They pulled back recently because the DOE came out with a FOA that seemed to be tailored for their project, and so they said, okay, we're going to put everything on hold and apply for this grant, and it's pretty significant. I think it's in the $5 million range. So they have made that application. Their initial proposal was approved by DOE, and they said, yes, you should go ahead and finish up your full proposal and submit that to us. That has been submitted. I don't know when DOE will make its announcement. If DOE selects Resolute, I think you'll see a deployment in Camp Riley be funded primarily with DOE money. And that's
And if I may, Resolute is a perfect example of doing wave energy testing in Oregon with an eventual market in Alaska, because their device is particularly well suited to Yakutat and other isolated villages that need not only electrical power but also desalinized water.
Yeah, and his long-term business plan includes work in Africa. So you have small communities that have neither fresh water nor reliable electricity. If you stick in a couple 30-kilowatt systems, all of a sudden you can provide internet access and a refrigerator for medicine and some lights, and make a huge difference in a small community.
Well, Jason, I think that's what was so compelling about their presentation, and from an outsider looking in, I thought what they were talking about was grounded in real problems in real communities with real price points, and that was markedly different from many of the other, now that separate out the messaging from companies versus their actual technology. But in that case, I think that was a breath of fresh air to hear that kind of that real connection between what they were doing and their target market. And I think it was very refreshing.
I'll say that it's been an interesting development in our sector because the Department of Energy has specifically declined to support so-called niche market technologies like that. That's not a wholesale generation device, electricity, the way the wind turbine gas facility is. It's niche markets only. Its output is limited to 30 kilowatts. It's nothing in the big picture, but it's fantastic for the right situation. DOE has probably changed. I think DOE's changed its tune on that and recognized that there are enough technologies in that niche market that can provide real value. But I would say that the majority of the focus, including the WEC prize, was all about utility scale projects. Your technology had to meet some standards that essentially required that it was a deep water utility scale project.
Well, I think
that's where
that reflects the unfortunate tendency to conflate economic development and energy technology development, because in the economic development world, they all have that expression. You keep swinging for the fences, you're going to strike out all the time. You get there by singles and doubles, and making investments in real communities like that with real problems where it makes sense is a terrific idea, and I'm glad to hear they've come to their senses. Crash and burn enough.
But the other shortfall of the WEC prize, from my personal opinion, is that the criteria did not include the things that Scott and I would consider important. deployability, maintainability, survivability, recoverability, those pesky ilities that make the difference between something that has to be salvaged and something that is recovered routinely. And the WEC prize was largely Brainiac level, technology. It doesn't have, I don't think there are many people with saltwater in their veins involved in the evaluation. So, we're going to have to, that's something that OWEC and the Marine Energy Council needs to speak up on is, hey, if you end up with a winner that is so fragile that it can't make it in the water or get back out without becoming wreckage, this is not a positive move. And I don't know how much we'll be listened to on that, but we're going to need to continue to say it.
Shouldn't our folks in NASA and the Navy basically try to also be the tap DOE on the shoulder and say, you ought to be thinking about these?
Well, let me add this. Rick's right. They are focused more or less exclusively on the magic juju of how you extract energy out of the ocean. Right? Many, many different ways to do that. Can we come up with a way that's more efficient and cost less and use less materials? At the same time, there's some pretty excellent work going on at the National Renewable Energy Lab, something called the Structured Innovation Initiative, where they're breaking down a project into its component parts, and there are 8 or 9. PTO, for example, power takeoff is one, mooring is one, and electrical connections are one. The smart controls and how it responds on a moment-to-moment basis is another part. And they're starting now to get really smart about saying, some of these things can be interchangeable. We could develop one that was licensable to all companies, so you wouldn't have to replicate the connectors or do that work yourself or make that investment. And we come up with the best way to do it. We saw that same thing develop in wind turbines. And when certain technologies got licensed to everyone, they just really took off. The sizes got bigger, their efficiencies went up, their reliability went up, their costs went down, and things really took off. So I think the industry is maturing in some ways. It's not just a bunch of scattered, uncoordinated companies all doing absolutely everything themselves. They're starting to see that they're part of a much bigger effort, and coming with organizations like NRL, National Renewable Energy Lab, with DOE funding, are targeting just those things: reliability, cost, acceptability, all the while trying to bring maximize the amount of output and reducing the cost. Stop there. Now we've got more to do.
We do. So in our last 30 minutes here, we have a few things we've got to get done here. Scott?
Very quickly, while we're on the subject of research and demonstration projects, I wonder if Joanne could just update us if there's anything coming up at Camp Rylea other than the Resolute project.
We haven't been approached by anyone yet. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wave Carpet was one that expressed interest a year ago and quickly
That was
retracted. Yes, very quickly.
Thank you.
They're in the Wave Prize though, so we'll see them in the top 9.
So as we know, Senate Bill 319 2015 session gave DSL the authority to require removal fill permit for any volume of activity, removal fill activity in the territorial sea, specifically when it relates to ocean renewable energy device facilities. Senate Bill 319 also at the very end tagged on in a concern not to quell research and demonstration. It did direct the agency to reach out to a technical group, you guys, to receive input on the appropriateness of creating a streamlined permit project process when it comes to research and demonstration projects. So full-scale commercial projects always going to require the individual permit from the Department of State Lands. That's our big regulatory area, big process, lots of public involvement. And as we know from Territorial Sea Plan Part 5, of course, the JART is engaged as well. So the question really becomes, what do we do with the research and demonstration projects that we know are going to be deployed for up to 5 years, so more limited duration, obviously more limited size. So So, meeting one, I talked a little bit about general authorizations and general permits as the two ways that we can streamline the approval process. This handout, this little color-coded handout, kind of summarizes that. So by statute, there are certain findings we have to make for general authorizations and general permits. Just in looking at Jason's presentation here today, I can tell you that I didn't see anything in that presentation that really tells me that, at least from a statutory standpoint, that it has to be a GA or it has to be a GP. That is, it seems like no matter which way we cut this, the activities involved with the research and demonstration project are substantially similar in nature. Right? They float on the water, they have some sort of anchoring system, and something that connects the floating part to the anchoring part. General authorization, we have to have minimal adverse effects to the aquatic resource. For general permits, they don't have to be minimal adverse effects, they don't have to be predictable. So that's a conversation we can have.
They don't all float. M3 and Resolute are bottom mounted.
Good. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that, Rick. That is an important distinction. The thing that triggers the removal fill law, by the way, is when something intercepts that ground surface. So if it's a floating type device, it's really the anchor that's triggering the removal fill permit. For that other type of structure, it's the whole column that's connected. So general authorization. Important things you need to know are that it's a 30-day process. A person asks for coverage by using a very simplified form that we create for each type of GA that we have. It's never more than 3 pages long, that application form. And basically, we review that, make sure they meet the sideboards that are spelled out in the administrative rule, and we're done. We stamp approved on their application, and we send it back to them. There is no conditioning of that authorization. All the conditions are in the administrative rule. So that's a very important distinction. There is no public review period. The standard permit duration for a general authorization is 3 years. We do have some flexibility there, but we can write a notwithstanding clause or something to that effect if we needed to create some other limited duration. We've talked about 5 years here. Fee structure, it's very simple. Either they're free, or if it involves 50 cubic yards or more of material, they're $250. That's it. So it's a very simple, very quick process. General permit, a little bit different. You use our standard full-blown application form to apply for that. The total time frame is 40 days for that. We get 15 days to make sure that the application is complete. We put it out on public review, public notice for 15 days, and then we have a final 10 days to put a bow on it and make our final permit decision. We can and pretty much always do condition general permits beyond the conditions that are placed in the administrative rule. So an administrative rule for a general permit will have certain baseline permit conditions printed in the rule, but we always add on to them with the final authorization. So it's a very important distinction from the general authorization.
Clarifying
Yep.
question, you're talking about project-specific conditions.
Project-specific conditions, correct, absolutely. 15-day public review period compared to none for the GA process. Standard duration is 5 years, so that lines up real well with how research pilot projects are defined in Territorial Sea Plan. And we use our standard fee schedule that changes every year by a consumer price index. I put some most likely costs that we can see. So as we think about whether to go down the general authorization or general permit pathway, I think a very important thing to keep in mind is that because of the quick turnaround on either of these, I think it's just obvious or imperative that the JART will need to do and complete its work before the developer applies for their final authorization from DSL. I don't see it working any other way unless you folks have a thought on that. So I'm thinking the JART is convening at the pre-application phase. They're working with the applicant through the resource inventory, the effects evaluation to make sure that's in place. Make sure it meets the criteria and definitions for a pilot project that are in Territorial Sea Plan Part 5. And when the JART completes its process, it ends with a recommendation to DSL to then issue the regulatory approval either as a general authorization or a general. So let me stop there. Does that make sense that the JART does its work first, provides that, make sure the inventory and effects evaluation is complete, does its other reviews for what else is involved there? There's operations plan.
Operations plan, just the other parts of the inventory.
Yep. That work gets complete, and the JART ends their process with a recommendation to us.
So the recommendation to determine whether or not the project gets a GA or GP is after it goes through the JART.
Yes, right.
Is there a timeline associated with that, like 30 days?
Not for the JART process.
It would have to be to make sense. I don't even understand how that would work for a business. Government is freaking bureaucratic enough as it is. Are you serious? There's no timeline. They could take 3 years to determine whether or not it's a GA or GP
Oh,
permit.
sorry. let me clarify. So what I meant was there's no time frame for how long the JART takes. There's nothing in Territorial Sea Plan Part 5
that says that.
that
Well,
says
if
the
the-
JART will make its determination.
Okay, well, if that's not the case, then I would say that your proposal does not make sense unless there is a timeline, like 30 days. They have to make a determination whether it's a GA or GP. That's my 2 cents.
I'm going to start recording.
Sir, this is Rick. One of the things as part of the rules, if we could include in the application for the GA or GP process documentation that demonstrates the engineering maturity of the proposed prototype. And that's a way of telling the folks that you're going to need to describe your engineering development process, your progressive testing process, your wave tank process, and how we know that you're ready to go in the water and it's not a Hail Mary.
And would you see that as being part of the JART's deliberation?
Well, I see that as part of the pre-application that, a developer that's going to apply for this knows that they have to provide documentation of engineering maturity, the basis of design for the mooring and anchoring, the basis of design for the cabling, so that because a lot of wave energy developers are inventors. They're not project developers. And we're going to have to guide them to the fact that, look, you need to present the holistic package here, not just like the wave carpet application, that was a complete Hail Mary. He just wanted to put his device in the water, and it was not ready to go in the water off Oregon.
So I think Andy maybe wants to touch on it, but I was going to
finish your thought first.
Well, I think Part 5, with all of the resource inventory and effects evaluation work, sort of set up to flush all that out. And if we have the JART meet at a pre-application phase with the developer and affected stakeholders to go through that should get the prospective developer thinking in that mold. And if they want to submit a complete application, they will have that information with their application.
All right. It would seem to be helpful to have it on a checklist. Here are the kinds of artifacts of design and evaluation and effects that we're going to want to evaluate, so they don't end up in a pre-application meeting surprised.
All right. So for this meeting, we developed a couple checklists based on Part 5. I have kicked around the idea of a pre-application checklist as well, but that wasn't complete at this time.
I just have a process question of where we are, and I don't want to go before YouTube. Are we trying to decide if the applications are going to be eligible for one or the other, or are we making a decision that they're all going to go under a general permit? Like, that's just a process question for today, because I wasn't clear on whether or not it's still possible that we may allow an applicant to go through either.
So it's a good clarification. So going into this, I was assuming that we will write either a general authorization or a general permit to cover research and demonstration projects, but not write both.
Thank you.
I think that would be over. The differences aren't big enough. I think that both. There are only two key differences. General permit takes 10 days longer. Sorry, three key differences. General permit takes 10 days longer. It involves a public review period, and we can write additional conditions beyond what's identified in the research. So really,
That's a pretty big deal, what you just said, the difference between how long.
well, the last one's a big deal, right? The first, I don't know, 30 versus 40 days. I'm not
Right,
sure.
out of the three
Yeah.
distinguishing features, it's the least of the two.
Yeah. So it's a pretty big deal that whether or not we want to write additional project-specific conditions or not, I think that's going to be necessary. I don't know enough about these devices and technologies to answer that on my own head. And a part was reason for having Jason give that presentation is to understand, are there enough variables that we would still need to write specific conditions for the specifically proposed action, or can we reasonably capture them now in the first term?
Laurel's had her card up.
Yeah.
Now I have so many other questions, but some of my questions were Andy's questions. So I was trying to figure out whether we were trying to decide one or the other, because we seem to go around in circles about whether or not we were choosing, or whether there would be options for the GA versus the GP. My other question is the individual permit completely off the table? Sounds like you guys are just thinking GA, GP. I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around, given how vastly different all these projects are, that we would be able to say, given that we haven't had any in the water, that we could say for sure that there would be only minimal impact, and that we wouldn't be able to put specific conditions on
just for research.
individual projects. They're so different that I don't know how that we could decide now, for 20 years, 5, 10, 15 years from now, what the conditions might need to be. That there'd be no public review process, because the JART doesn't necessarily have the public review process. We'd be front loading all the public review during the public review process for these rules. Yes? No?
So, Chris, JART does not have, JART has, are they public meetings? What's the extent of public meetings?
I don't know if they're public meetings. I have to look at Part 5.
Okay.
But our proprietary process, which any of these projects will be, does have a public review process built in now.
Okay. So the question would be, do you want one as well for the renewable fill process, on top of the proprietary process?
Redundant.
Well, what do you mean by public, Chris? It's like the meetings are open to the public, the locations and stuff.
I mean, there'll be a
notice of,
official public review and comment period. So I don't know how many meetings there'll be. Let's say there's a project that's going to go in, let's say M3, or somebody else is going to go in for 4 weeks. The JART, we will convene a JART, but I don't know if there'll be additional face-to-face outreach beyond that. But there will be a public review and comment period where somebody has the opportunity to review the application and provide comment to the department. Of course, the JART's going to do that as well, or for a temporary use authorization. Yes.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, I know you had some examples of other types of projects in our previous handout from last time that had GAs, GPs, individual permits. Could you just refresh everybody's summary about what kinds of projects get these different types of authorizations?
So for,
Do you have something
I
about
have
that
it right
handout?
here. For GPs, there are 4 adopted. This is page 2 of,
Just from last time.
yeah, that's my time. I actually think I stapled a few things together. Transportation-related structures, minor impact to certain non-tidal wetlands, vernal pool impacts in Jackson County, that's specific, maintaining drainage to protect agricultural land. For general authorization, there are 9 GA's adopted NADMIN rules. Minimal disturbance activities in essential salmonid habitat, piling placement and removal in essential salmonid habitat, temporary impacts in non-tidal wetlands, waterway bank stabilization, certain transportation-related activities, removing and disposing of sediment behind tide gates, waterway habitat restoration, wetland ecosystem restoration, and recreational placer mining in essential salmonid habitat, which surprised the heck out of me.
It's like canning.
Yeah,
But Laurel, one part of your question,
No, canning.
just man. Good.
Laurel, one part of your question was, are IPs off the table? Actually, I think IPs are the default right now, unless we decide to create a
Right,
general
but we were
authorization.
sort of just discussing between
Yes.
the two, and I just wanted to ask whether that was still being considered, and just trying to get a handle of what kind of terrestrial projects are in these categories, since this is sort of a new thing. And I mean, as we see with just the PMEC sets project, there's a lot of questions that come up and conditions we're putting in that project, so. Anyway, I just have lots of questions.
looks like we're on the next one.
Well, really quickly on what Joanne said with the having some kind of chart or otherwise that defined period that you're asked as an agency to sort of you can't let it go on forever. I mean, I know now running a planning department for 4 years. Trust me, every day we come to the office and we call it the shot clock. You know, if we've got a conditional use permit, we have a statutory responsibility to get that thing out by 30 days. And the bad day at the office is you've blown your shot clock and suddenly something's deemed approved when you were supposed to be. But that's the 30 days is a short period of time to get, because so much of what we're talking about, if you've got the right, just like JART, if you've got the right players in the room that know what the hell they're talking about, and they could represent people that are impacted, it can be a great process, and it could be a process that communities feel like, you know what, I really think like our interests are going to be heard, and that I've said to Chris a number of times, persuade me as someone that is representing the larger coastal community interest here, that this JART process, by the time it's all put together and its and its composition, its makeup, its internal process, who's going to be writing reports, all that stuff is fleshed out. That we say, I think we're going to get a fair shake in that process. What I find hard, again, trying to answer GA and GP, of course I'm inclined not to do the GA thing. It just doesn't pass the straight face test that you don't have public review. For God's sakes, throw it in there. I mean, if you want to create a crap storm, just go ahead and decide to do the GA. Make my day, for God's sakes. But the other thing, so to me, that's not a difficult question. What I'm struggling with is, to the extent that we've got a certain amount of these things are small and temporary, and this and that, whether they're called research or university-led or not, and certainly if they're in places that have already been vetted, I got zero heartburn on trying to accelerate that. And Lincoln County commissioners, the real commissioners, they have been very, very favorable about trying. That's why PMAC and all that has worked out, because they want to support that research. But when these demonstration projects start to become really big things that are in the water for a long, long time, they look and feel very different than some of the stuff that GAs are meant to be, which are truly de minimis activities. So that's where I'm struggling. I just want, that's where the bright lines, what it is we're talking about, seem to be, and where, and are they previously vetted areas, are become very meaningful to some of us. Thank you.
Well, first of all, as I read Part 5, and the functions of the JART, I see that it is to advise DSL as an agency, but I don't see any recommendations or requirement that those are public meetings. In terms of a clock, an application clock, I think in the past, when M3 came through and did this, agencies responded very quickly to an applicant's request. And I think that in some ways, not having a clock in a pre-application setting gives an entity who's coming in looking for a permit or an authorization the flexibility that if they need to go back to the drawing table, they're not violating their shot clock and then having to come start to do it again. So I don't know.
Typically what happens then is with an applicant is that we talk on the phone or otherwise, and we say, look, you can either grant us more time, or I can write you a letter of incompleteness, and you can write us a new check. I mean, it has a very disciplining effect on
Sure.
the applicant.
Yeah. So going back to the GA or GP, I really feel like if there's not a public part of the JART, then there has to be a public part of the process, and I would recommend going through the general permit, just because it does add that little bit of time, even though it's a small window. And goal number 1 in our state is citizen involvement in decisions, and I think without having that, I think we don't do that justice. So my view is leaning towards that. If it is not that much more time, that would be my opinion.
So before we go pick up these cards, on that thought, Andy, so totally understand the importance of public involvement. Because we have 2 parts of DSL that would be processing something concurrently that both have public review processes, do you think it would be sufficient for the 2 halves of DSL, if you will, to use one public review?
Yes.
If we do that now, we try to piggyback
We do
on
try
each
to
other's
do
public
that.
comment period. We have obviously a lot of overlap.
What we could do
So-
is hardwire that.
Remind us what those 2 pieces of DSL are, what's
So
proprietary piece?
proprietary and regulatory. Yeah.
So
And an administrative rule, we could.
Yeah.
this kind of red flagged everybody. This is not correctly stated then. No public review. You really do have a public review with the GA, with the concurrent process that you're describing.
So yeah.
So this inflames the conversation when you say no public review, when you know DSL has public review.
You're right. So there's no public review in the regulatory process.
Right.
There is still a
Through the process there is.
regulatory,
You have to.
Public review for the
So many
proprietary.
tickets.
That's a good point.
But the considerations for the proprietary side might be different than the regulatory side, so people wouldn't be able to comment on the regulatory.
They would comment
for
on
the
both.
proprietary
There are people
side
that
of
comment
things,
on
so
both.
So that's a risk, and that's something you'd
I
have to
don't know.
clarify.
unless you could,
If we did create a single administrative rule for one public review process, we could clarify the intent of that public process to cover both parts.
And it would include the public would have the opportunity, I'm assuming, to look at their resource inventory and effects evaluation too, which we will be looking at from both sides of Department of State Lands and making our coordinated permit decisions as well.
Which is a requirement under 319. So I'm not sure who is next to the 3 cards.
I think Delaware was.
Are you done?
He was quite deep.
oh, no, I come in after them. I just have a
Okay,
quick.
Delia, go ahead.
Okay. Where did I want to start? I think the primary problem, though, with the general authorization is the lack of conditionality. And when I read through the 9 existing authorizations under rule, they're all things that are well understood. And I haven't seen any demonstrations in today's presentation, or from my understanding of the industry, that would lead me towards thinking that there's a predictable or well understood environmental effects from a test. That's why we need tests. So until the industry matures somewhat, we would lean towards the GP which I do think we could put some constraints on and come up with some limitations on how the GP could apply. Some of the things that ODFW would be interested in would be the entirely removable part about it, which makes me question whether or not it could be grid connected. So at some point, probably not today since it's 5 minutes to 4, we could discuss how the cable easement and part 4 would become integral to whether or not a grid-connected demonstration, because it does say that it could be temporarily connected to the grid if you use the definition under 140. Anyway, again, back to that sort of circular, how are all these things relating to one another? Other things that would need to be considered in what sort of a constraint or sideboards would put on the GP would be the footprint, spatial location, the duration. We could consider whether or not they would only be appropriate within the ref says, as already defined. I'm wondering if this would be wave only or if it would include wind. ODFW has our in-water work windows, which could have some seasonal constraints. Anyway, so those are some of the things, just kind of spitballing what those sideboards might look like, since that's what you asked for.
That's good.
Which is exactly why the mandatory conditions thing is such a problem. The original idea of the legislation was to improve the permitting process for marine energy. The addition of the fill permit and eliminating the 50 cubic yard trigger now puts us in this position where we're discussing under what conditions we might approve an general authorization and general permit. But under the law prior to the statute, if you put something in the water that wasn't 50 cubic yards, you didn't have to do any of this. So the only reason the legislature added this question about the general authorization and general permit was they recognized that we were in fact increasing the burden on permitting rather than decreasing it by adding this mandatory condition, giving us the opportunity to discuss under what conditions we can do a general permit or general authorization. I dare say, Delia, that unfortunately 10 years from now, the resource agency community will still be uncomfortable with the idea of putting big machines in the water. And your level of comfort or the idea of the risk or uncertainty associated with that's going to be a decades-long conversation before we'll ever get to the position where a resource agency personnel would say, I don't know, we got this, we understand this stuff. It's just not going to happen, which is the source of the eternal conversation about how do we de-risk this stuff, how do we lower the amount of investment and time that the industry has to invest before we can even just put a demonstration project in the water. Just want to highlight what is happening in the undercurrents of this whole conversation. So as we start laying out the criteria under which we would approve a demonstration project, we start talking about sideboards. Well, that's back where we were to begin with, and it certainly doesn't improve the permitting process for marine energy. Obviously, sideboards are important, but when they become too extensive,
That's what they'll ask us for.
that's right. And when they become too extensive, they hinder the development of the technology as opposed to streamlining it. Not streamlining, but at least facilitating.
But sort of echoing, if I may, sorry to jump in, but the point is, if some of these demos are big honking projects, and first of all, the 50, you blow through a 50 cubic yard threshold in a heartbeat, so let's not pretend that that's somehow some onerous thing to have to comply with that. But that's where I'm just struggling with this, is that if we could cull out stuff that was vetted properly, that was really small and temporary in nature, we would all feel really comfortable about the so-called expediting to eliminate this great burden on the industry that seems to be holding it back so much. But the bottom line is these things can be really big and really long-term. And if we're not careful, they're going to be the foot in the door for a much larger project at that same location. And therein lies the problem.
Okay, I'm reading the paper. I'm reading the paper that was put before this group. That's what I'm reading. I don't know what you guys are reading. But the questions that were put to this group were for deciding a GA versus a GP for research and demonstration projects. Research and demonstration projects, not big commercial individual permitted projects. Research and demonstration projects. The second part is whether or not we would look at doing them under GA or GP. Kirk propose having the JARP review projects in the pre-application process to determine whether or not they would be appropriate under GA or GP. Am I understanding this correctly?
No, once we create a GA or GP, then the JART would say, yes, that's appropriate for that.
Okay, so the agency
Yeah.
would look at the criteria that you have here, which seems reasonable. They're not substantially similar. They're minimal, which means minimal footprint is the way I read it. They're not. I mean, you're questioning the experience of staff that does this every day. They give mining permits all over the friggin' state. I mean, so to me, I think that's a reasonable approach. I think that the approach for the public review process being concurrent in the GSL's process now, integrating that is appropriate. And I just don't understand what the issue is. GA, GP, but they have to get permits through
In water.
state.
they have to
Yeah,
get permits for
yeah.
this.
So those are the questions that were put before this group, and I don't know where it went from there. But I'm trying to get through. I want to get through the process and have it work for everybody.
So where I sense people getting stuck, Joey,
Yeah.
is a little bit around the conditioning and to what extent the regulatory agency.
And the conditions we already have under the administrative rule, right? There are conditions already, standard conditions.
That would be our
It says
job
there
to
is
write
no
those,
further conditioning of the project beyond conditions adopted in the administrative rule.
which we
Okay,
still need to adopt.
so there's no conditions recommended in Part 5 already for projects? There's nothing in Part 5 that speaks to potential conditions?
The GA and the GP are the regulatory branch, so that would be under rule, so it's 93 for the general permit, it's 85 for the
Sure.
individual permit.
Sure, but
So those are what they're asking us to write, whether or not we need a new authorization or a new permit.
Right. So, but isn't there anything in Part 5 that calls out recommended conditions for projects? Or is there
There's
not?
a little bit of language under pilot.
There's a little, and I
Okay.
think we could look at that and see whether or not.
And
I
there's
think that's-
there's
It
also
would need-
examples under existing authorizations and permits, and that's
Right.
what I was saying, Joanne.
Okay.
Is that I went through all of those
Okay.
to try to figure out if there's examples that we can draw from.
Right.
And all of those examples that I gave you,
We're from Part 5.
no, they all exist in existing authorizations or permits, general permits or general authorizations. I mean, they're all they're all
Right, I get it.
individually.
But they weren't pulled
so
from Part 5. You were pulling them from...
I was pulling them from wherever I could pull them.
Yeah.
different-
Just
Okay.
as examples.
Okay.
For what might be
Okay.
appropriate sideboards.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part
Well-
5 only answers one set of questions about some very early threshold questions, but I think the
I don't...
follow up how we actually do something is.
Right, but I don't think that so on the one hand, I hear people saying that we don't know enough about the industry, and so we need to vet them thoroughly. And then on the other side is that, well, you don't know enough about the industry, but you want to condition them, and you don't have enough information to condition them appropriately. In my opinion, I think that this isn't the group to do that. I think that where there's knowledge enough to put the appropriate conditions and monitor them, which I think that could be something to look at, and they report back and stuff, that's appropriate for this group. I don't think that this group, other than maybe the industry, I don't know, has the knowledge base to appropriately condition this industry. Now, I say that because how are other industries in the ocean, how have the regulations been developed for other industries in the ocean? They've been developed because they've done something wrong in the ocean. This industry hasn't done anything wrong yet. You have definitely specific examples of where bad examples have been set, but on a whole, the industry hasn't done as bad a damage as other industries that are already existing in the ocean, and that regulations have been developed up around those industries. What we're doing is we're putting all these onus of requirements on industry that hasn't done anything yet bad in the ocean, and you were assuming all this stuff is going to happen, which is fine. I mean, I think you have to be, careful and circumspect, but I don't think you put all the conditions on an industry that has yet to I just don't think that this group is the appropriate group to be putting conditions. I don't think the state has the wherewithal to do environmental assessment. If they did, if through DLCTD or whatever agency the government had determined the state could do that, then it would be a different thing. But so that's my 2 cents. I think the GA with appropriate broad conditioning based on existing guidance from Part 5 and wherever else is appropriate to do. I don't see anything else beyond that. And that's what we're here to talk about. Because I'll tell you, the regulations for other industries did not develop until those industries started wrecking the environment.
As a planning director, we work conditions with applicants every day, all day long. I know I don't
Scott,
have
go
to
next.
There I go
Scott's
again.
up,
There
and
you go
then
again.
Jason.
I just don't want to lose the thread of that I think we're only being asked whether the authority to ask for conditions, not making the conditions up front. Maybe we don't need to do conditions, but that authority should be there.
But there's no. Why should the authority be there if you don't even have the wherewithal to appropriately condition?
Why are you so against it?
I'm not against it. I just don't want to do something that is not logical. It doesn't make sense.
No public review, no right to put conditions on.
No, there's public review and there's
Jesus
conditions.
Christ,
I'm not
just hand the keys
suggesting
to the
that.
ocean, Joanne.
I am not suggesting
So we
that,
got Scott
sir.
up.
I'm
and then
suggesting
Jason.
both public review and conditions.
Let's give Scott a chance and then Jason.
Well, if you look at the paper, the 2 questions at the bottom, first one, are we confident that we can identify right now in administrative rule all appropriate conditions? I think that's obvious. No, we can't. If we looked at this PowerPoint that Jason provided, every technology is different. Every site is different. There's temporal differences. So all these things play into what conditions might be appropriate for any project. We can't sit here today and say, oh, well, we can identify all the conditions that might ever be necessary right now and check that box.
And could we do that? And could we do that in the 30-day period under the GP?
We can
A 30-day
put
review period under the
conditions
GP.
on it
You could
that
do
are
that.
appropriate
Or
based on what
categorically
the
say
specific
I'm saying with the-
Well,
Okay.
remember, there are
Okay.
2 opportunities to
Okay.
develop conditions. The JART, through its work, can
Right.
develop conditions and recommend them to DSL.
Right.
And then DSL, through its own scrutiny,
Can
pile on if they see fit.
right.
The
So
second
that's
part of the
conditions.
So are you asking for the authority to do that or not?
No.
the
Can Scott finish his comment?
The second question is, are we confident that opportunity for public engagement is satisfied through the JART process? And we've already heard JART meetings aren't public. I think part of the need for having a public engagement is because it may be the public that comes up with comments that are germane to developed appropriate conditions. No matter who is on the JART, and I certainly hope that the fishing industry is represented on the JART, but even if they're not, we need to make sure that the public has an opportunity to make comments so that conditions that may be appropriate for a specific area, specific time, or specific technology are appropriately incorporated in the conditions. So I'd say that absolutely the answer on both of these questions is no, we need a general permit, and a general authorization just will not work.
Thank you. Jason?
I don't think there's any disagreement that conditions are appropriate. Conditions for putting something in the water are appropriate. Obviously, that to me that's not a big deal. The question is, if we're going to meet the statutory goal of establishing a expedited process by which we can get a number of small projects in the water and advance the understanding of the technology, how do we limit the open-ended problem that we've experienced in the industry thus far in terms of conditions and the time it takes to meet those conditions?
That's the question.
Evidence by what?
Hold on.
I don't disagree that there needs to be some conditions, but I also disagree that we don't know anything about what these projects do. We're going to be in sandy bottom. We're going to use a clump anchor, or we're going to use a drag and bedman anchor. There's going to be some ropes. There's going to be something floating on the surface, and there's going to be something mounted at the bottom. The same way every single device in the world has been. So we do know something about the technology. We do have pretty good understanding at some level about all the environmental effects. We're not operating in a vacuum here. So I just want to find that appropriate path that allows us to meet our goal here of facilitating research and development of marine energy technologies and avoid an open-ended, conditions-driven process that undermines what we all set out to do to begin with, which is where I see it going. If we don't have some sideboards on the conditions, in a sense.
Can someone on the phone say something, please?
Yeah, Walter.
Hello?
Yeah. So, once again, I would not favor any of the GAs for anything other than research at the test site, like NIMREC. Anything else should go for the GP. And as far as this technology not being proven, it's proven that the first buoy off Newport sank. And as far as I know, there's only been one out there at the net site that actually worked. So the industry has not proven that this stuff works, and that's why the research needs to be done. If there's a GA to be given, it needs to be given to research.
That's what we're
Anything
talking
other than
That's what we're talking.
this projects will turn into development. Why are we doing this concurrently? Research should be done first and then projects. Let's make sure this stuff works. I think that's where you're seeing the brushback. And if this stuff does work, in 10 years, I can see the processing being streamlined. But right now, you have an unproven technology in a very sensitive and very productive area already. So why would we want to jeopardize that for something that's not been proven through good research? Thank you.
Thank you. Captain Williams, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I agree that perhaps the general authorization could be used for NIMRIC or Camp Rylea in collaboration with NIMRIC, which is part of the MOU between OSU and the Oregon Military Department. And that organization of either NIMRIC down south or OMD with NIMRIC provides some professionalism for what's going to be proposed to go in the water. And maybe the GA would be appropriate there. If not involved in a research-oriented organization, then the GP.
So why don't I do this? I can start by drafting an administrative rule that is for a general permit that would have certain conditions associated with it. If you guys look at that and you say, oh my God, you've captured everything that we could conceivably want to condition around one of these, then maybe that tells us something, that maybe we can push this over to the GA. In terms of rule writing, the difference between the GA and the GP is not that big a deal. Does that make sense?
So let me add a point to my comment.
Sure.
Maybe the approach we take is here is the process for a GP, and if the following conditions exist, or the following, you're doing it with NIMRIC, you're doing it with the Oregon Military Department with NIMRIC, then it could be a GA. We say it's a GP except if it's a GA. And then we have some specific bins for that exception.
Okay. Okay, we can take a look at that.
Yeah.
That starts to get to be a lot more rule writing, but
Yeah.
all right, let me see what I can outline on that idea.
If you go back to what it gets you, does that really get the developer very much?
It gets them a 10-day faster process.
Yeah.
I don't think the 10 days is going to be a big deal, guys. Our rules, the land management rules, require, even though we've let it slip on several occasions, 180 days application prior to wanting to deploy, and then it takes a while to do it. So a 10-day public comment period for a removal fill permit. And we are still going to circulate all of our proprietary applications too. I don't think that's a big deal. The question is, do you want additional conditions?
Well, and if
X factor.
these kinds of nuances are the make or break for someone who's actually going to come here and do something, and the project is handled by a slender reed.
Can you clarify, please? We're talking about research projects here, not commercial projects. We're talking about research projects for the GA or GP. Okay, research and
Demonstration.
I read
demonstration projects.
demonstration, which
Okay.
could be different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Demo starts to be big. That's
Yeah.
my quandary.
That's
Yeah.
why we went through the
It is
So
de minimis
clarification, we
in the
got
places
Jason
you
up
and I
here.
are talking about.
And-
It's something else.
I'm tempted to run down that rabbit hole. I'll stick to my original. So from my perspective, the time issue is a non-issue. No, what, 10 days, 30 days, 40 days, it doesn't matter. Fees don't matter. In fact, I would suggest that the state should reconsider its fees as a disincentive to selecting areas or site banking as a mechanism to restrict that. Because if you're talking about $750, it's just not an issue. For me, it's just all about the conditions.
Yeah.
The situation that the industry faces and that we internally chew on constantly is the open-ended permitting process. Mandatory conditions are part of that conversation. The only thing that I'm concerned about this process moving forward is the conditions. If we can agree on a suite of conditions that are the bank of possible conditions that can be applied to any project, it's no problem. Those are pretty easily understandable, and the industry can bring you the categories of environmental issues that we're well aware of and spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to figure out. It's just trying to limit what the open-ended aspect of those conditions are. That's really the only issue from my perspective.
And the GP has both. I understand that right.
Has both what?
It doesn't have to have additional conditions on it. It just has to meet the standards.
Yeah,
It has the opportunity for additional conditions.
yeah.
So
If we can outline what those possible conditions can be, that's no problem. But if we leave it to an open-ended process, and to Joanne's comment, well, how quickly are we going to actually be able to come up with what those conditions? All of a sudden, that 30-day process turns into quite a bit longer process. And the whole goal is here for a small research temporary project with minimal possibility to affect the environment, getting the water expeditiously. It's all we're focused on.
Clear, consistent, and predictable.
Just quick question. So when we're talking about conditions, are we talking about preconditions that are set forth that I as an applicant look at these 10 things and I have to meet these? Or am I submitting my project and then conditions are being put on it? Both? Is that what you mean by both?
So,
Okay.
right. For the general permit, that's how it works. There's
Yeah.
pre-established ones. Then for the specifics of your project, there may be additional ones.
There may be.
And
It's
what
not
does that
mandatory.
process look like? How do additional conditions be put on
That's the
a
question.
project?
So one of several ways. So it could be a review of our staff and their understanding what the effects will
Okay,
be
so
to the
DSL
resource.
staff. Okay.
The public review period, the feedback we get from that.
Okay.
And then, because territorial sea plan is at play, the JART might
JART.
provide.
And are those mandatory conditions? If JART or the public or somebody said you should do this, is it then DSL's
Gonna say yeah.
decision?
JART doesn't have that authority to mandate any action on DSL, so it would have to be a recommendation.
So they come as recommendations, these
Right.
potential additional conditions,
Correct.
and then DSL makes
We're
the
the
final
final
determination.
Yep.
Much like your removal fill
Yeah.
process
Yep.
from before. It doesn't give anybody the additional authority
Correct.
to put mandatory conditions on a project.
So when you issue a permit, there's a laundry list, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things that are the conditions of the permit.
So there
That's how that looks.
are the conditions that'll be identified in the general permit, and the administrative rule, the standard ones, and then there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, usually not more than that are layered on over time.
But to Justin's point, it's not like some crackpot shows up at a JART meeting and says something and automatically now it's got to be built into it.
That was my question,
Right,
what's
yeah,
the
nobody's
oversight
talking about that.
for the conditions?
they make all the decisions.
Yeah.
It won't quit.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So, one of the things that it would be good to preclude in the way this is done is for DSL to have the authority to, which you already do, to make the final determination. But what we've seen in the past is well-intentioned people come up with a, gee, well, I'd like you to find out about fill in the blank. I had it happen down in Humboldt where the Green Sturgeon Task Force wanted to find out about green sturgeon. They didn't have any funding, and they wanted us to fund their basic research. And to be able to define outcome-based, result-based, questions that could be, because you could end up with all kinds of stuff on conditions that take a long time to do because it's been on the list of someone's, gee, I'd really like to learn about and you're asking, so you get the honor of doing the research. These are projects that whatever conditions have to be specifically addressing aspects of the project, not the greater question of, basic research.
With a
Yeah.
clear nexus of impact.
Yeah.
So that's a cross that DSL staff bears every day with public comments we get on removal fill applications. We're only required, and we can only look at and consider those comments that are relative to the 6 things that statute tells us are our decision-making points. So if someone tells us
Thank
they
you.
don't like something that's not related to effect of the aquatic resource, kind of tough luck.
Are those existing conditions already in the OARs? Have you pointed those out to us? Are they already in the
So the
materials?
standards by statute, no, I can get those.
Because it sounds like you've got this existing set of things you're supposed to run everybody through.
Right.
And then the point is that there may be some additional, absolutely with a nexus of the project and not doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I can circulate to you guys kind of what the statute says in terms of our 6 decision-making points for any decision.
They may end up being, after we look at that we may end up saying, wow, that's a really comprehensive list to begin with,
Yeah, no, you won't.
That's pretty general, right?
They're
Yeah,
pretty
just-
general. I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and take a crack at crafting some generic conditions that would apply to all projects, and have you guys take a look at that and have you tell me, well, that's close, but for sure there would still be additional project-specific conditions, and that would ice the cake for me. Then we're talking about a GP.
So one of the questions I don't quite understand is, so if you got an individual permit for a fill permit, right, the issue would be like, okay, you're going to put something in the water that could affect the environment. Is there a gap between the questions that you would ask, that DSL staff would ask about a given project? If I showed up tomorrow with a wave energy device and I'm just going to apply for an individual permit under existing rules, and I'm going to put a 20,000-pound clump weight out there, you would say, that's going to trigger some questions. What are the impacts on the benthic environment? What's going to happen to sediment transport? What else would you mind?
So what are the effects to public trust values going to be?
Okay. And anything else come to mind?
How are you getting it out?
How you get it
Yeah,
out?
right,
I'm not making the point. I'm going to know what would you ask. And the question would be like, well, so what about acoustics? You going to care what the clump weight sounds like down there? Are you going to think about wells? Or are you going? Where's it stop? How do you limit the universe of potential environmental effects tied to the deployment of that clump weight out in the ocean?
So we have the authority to consider all adverse effects to the aquatic resource. That said, if there's a certain point where you've got to draw the line, you can't think about what's the effect to, killer whales and some other place going to be to this thing. At a certain point, you just have to apply common sense on where a coordinator draws the line.
There are thresholds that could be drawn, though. You're talking about a certain portion of the area, the space that the applicant provides. There's proportionality. We talked about that in the conditions that this group.
And there's precedent.
listed.
People have been working on this issue with PMEX sets. You guys must have a pretty good list of the potential issues that are associated with the project, no?
Got a few ideas.
Yeah, I'm sure
Except
you
to
do.
his eyeballs.
And the problem is that the list gets a little long because, and the question is, what's the nexus to that potential effect? And that's where the debate starts occurring. And my concern is that we're not prepared to have that debate, and DSL will get into a very long conversation deciding whether or not a given project and the EMF associated with that one is significant enough to affect the migratory habits of salmonids. That undermines the entire intent of putting the device in the water to begin with, especially if they're preconditions.
But that's not what you're asking us to do here on this rack, correct? Do we need to go into that level of detail in order to enable you to do your work? They make the decision. They consult the necessary parties. They have the rules that give them the statutory authority to do that. That's all we have to do.
And it seems like the
Right.
JART would,
We just want to know
would
if
make
you think,
recommendations
if
on
there's something that's
conditions that would be appropriate
for
for that project,
certain types of projects.
which would be taken under
We're
advisement.
trying to see what there are types
Because
of projects.
looking at the same problem through a different lens, Jason, you're concerned they're going to ask too much. We're concerned they're going to ask too little. And I've often had legislators ask me in different situations, how do we make this program work? And if you've got reasonable people carrying on the program, it's amazing how well it works. And so the idea that you sort of front load, that you can draft in an OAR, how you guys are going to be reasonable. Look, the remedy there is if they start asking for how does this affect the sandhill grains in Nebraska, then by God, you run to the land board or you go to the head of DSL and you say, your guys are nuts and you need to rein them in. That's the remedy.
So we
Yeah.
need to start wrapping it up here, I think.
Yeah,
to honor people's
we
times.
sure do.
When we're talking about sandhill cranes in Nebraska,
Couple things.
I would just ask that in your draft you talk to proportionality, so that it gives people a sense that DSL is going to look at proportionality with respect to each project. That's and when you have that, then you get conditions that are proposed that are outside of the reasonable scope of reasonable people proportionality. Then you have potential recourses to if things get out of hand. I have examples I could forward you from other.
So some homework for you guys that we didn't get to. I'm sorry.
Go ahead and give them their homework.
Okay,
Oh,
just take a
God.
look at the two checklists. They're right out of Part 5. Talk about streamlining. The one spot that is streamlined through Part 5 is testing at NEMREC nets. You get to skip the JART and the resource inventory checklist and effects evaluation, and you get to bypass the operation plan development with the exception of the decommissioning plan and the financial assurance plan, which are both required by statute. Please take a look at them. Let me know if I missed anything. They were sort of went right through those sections, respective sections of Part 5 to develop these. Ran them by DLCD. And then I'll wait to say what the rest of what I want to say. So you can...
I was just going to remind you, Chris, this was a publicly noticed meeting, so we do need to give the public an opportunity to make a comment.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Will there be anyone from the public wishing to comment? Raise your hand. Bless you.
So we have a couple things to look at. Maybe trying to write up some draft of GP or GA. I'm going to look at first right to apply and think about that some more and get you guys some thoughts on that. We did not get to the JART. We do have a memo on that that we will touch on next meeting.
And a question asked about.
And a question asked, yes. I would like to get to the pre-application, sort of discuss what a pre-application process for a JART would be. It's meant to come after we discuss the JART a little more, but maybe we can do that at the next meeting. Also, let you guys know I'm going to talk to Jennifer, I think her name is Galladay from BOEM tomorrow about an hour discussion with her about how they do decommissioning and financial assurance too. Our process is sort of it's prescriptive through statute, but it'll be good to talk to her, and I'll let you know what I hear.
You guys okay with meeting next month somewhere on the Central Coast? We talked about that at the first meeting. Okay,
Depends
all right.
on vacation
I'll talk to
schedules.
Walter. Maybe he'd be willing to host us at Puerto Rico.
The Olympics happen next
Very
month
self-serving.
in Rio.
Sounds
Does
good.
anyone on the phone have a question or comment before we adjourn?
No, I like the coast. I'd be there, but I'm actually in Ashland right now. I've been sitting in a parking lot for the last 5 hours.
Oh my God.
Walter?
Dedication.
Did you miss the play?
That's dedication. No, it's okay.
No, I'm going dropping my kids off at summer camp.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've got policy papers. I did.
Okay.
Were we supposed to get some other handouts at home? Or is that in our packet already?